At 12:43 a.m. on April 13th, 2025, Ilia Topuria was officially no longer the UFC featherweight champion. And at 1:18 a.m. April 13th, 2025, Alexander Volkanovski would become a two-time featherweight champion. He is the new 145-pound king as he takes out the surging Diego Lopes in the main event of UFC 314 to capture the vacant title. The great Alexander Volkanovski, at 36 years of age, has proved the doubters wrong. He has proved the naysayers wrong, and he has proved the narrative wrong. That stat that everybody talks about, 35 and older at lightweight or below, have never won a championship fight in the UFC. And now Alexander Volkanovski has put that to bed, and he is the featherweight champion of the world, as he and Diego Lopes gave us one of the best fights of 2025 thus far, where they would go toe-to-toe for 25 minutes in a very high-level back-and-forth affair, where we would see Alexander Volkanovski get the nod on the scorecards and win the unanimous decision. He would win the bout 49-46 or 4-1 on two judges' scorecards and 48-47 on another. And not only would Alexander Volkanovski prove that narrative of 35 and older incorrectly, but he would also prove that his chin still has gas left in its tank, because he took the hardest shots from Diego Lopes. He even got knocked down at one point in this fight, I believe round 2, but it wasn't enough. He was able to withstand the storm, get back to his feet, and win the following rounds. He gave Diego Lopes everything that he could handle. Volkanovski looked as crisp as he has ever looked before following his 14-month hiatus after losing his title to Ilia Topuria in February of last year at UFC 298. And after back-to-back losses, back-to-back knockout losses in championship fights, one at lightweight and one at featherweight, this has to feel absolutely incredible for the former champion, now turned two-time champion, Alexander Volkanovski. You could feel it in the lead up to this fight, how much of a chip that he had on his shoulder, and how much he truly in his heart of hearts still wanted to be amongst the best of the best in the world. And in the aftermath of UFC 314, that is exactly what he showcased. And I tell you what, Diego Lopes entered this fight on a 5-fight win streak in the last 3, all against top 15 opponents. He was absolutely a number 1 contender worthy fighter in this weight class, him and Movsar Evloev. Lopes would ultimately get the nod, and I think he showed here for 25 minutes that he can stand tall with the best fighters in the world at 145 pounds. He took all of the biggest shots that Volkanovski had to offer, got knocked backward into the fence, I want to say 2, 3, maybe even 4 times in this fight, but just kept pressing forward, and all the way up until the 25th minute in the 40th second, where he's starting to point at the ground during the last 10 to 15, he was willing to go out on his shield and do whatever it took to become the champion of the world. And although he would fall short, this is not the last that we will see of Diego Lopes. And I said on Friday that should he lose here to Volkanovski, it's not me saying he'll never challenge for the title again, but it is a bit of a hiccup. It will delay him from getting back there here in the near future, and that is not his fault. That is just simply because of how stacked 145 pounds is right now. As of last night at UFC 314, there were 4 matchups in the featherweight top 15, and we saw Lerone Murphy versus Josh Emmett, number 8 versus number 10, just last week. So in a 7-day span, there were 5 matchups, all featuring top 15 fighters, and that's a lot of movement to be had come Tuesday morning in the rankings. But it does work into Diego's favor that he was able to have success in this fight. He was able to win a round or 2 in this fight, and he didn't necessarily get outclassed or starched. He had his moments. He stood tall. He went toe-to-toe with the greatest featherweight of all time, and I think in the aftermath, at 30 years old, he's still right in his prime. He's had some of the most success that we've seen in the UFC from 2023 and 2024. He is still relative in the title talks. He is still relevant in the elite discussions of who the best featherweights in the world are at this current state in April of 2025. But at UFC 314, it just wasn't his night. But for Diego, luckily for him, I should say, I think it's pretty clear what is next for him in the aftermath of this event. And it was all set up in the pre-fight press conference on Thursday, where him and Yair Rodriguez would go off on one another, causing all kinds of drama, all kinds of chaos.
Culón, eres culón, ¿sabes por qué eres culón? No le pegaron a Diego contra tu equipo.
Say it to my face,
No le pegaron a Diego no le pegaron a Mark contra tu equipo.
And it seems as though the drama stems back to the training camps between Yair Rodriguez and between Diego Lopes. Yair getting also frustrated at Diego for being from Brazil, moving to Mexico, and saying that that is his home country. Yair having a little bit of an issue with that. Some sort of training partner drama. Maybe someone went a little bit too hard on somebody in sparring, and it just came to a boil at that pre-fight press conference. And I think it was easy to say that if Diego Lopes won the title and Yair Rodriguez won against Patricio Pitbull, that was the fight the UFC was going to do for the Featherweight Championship in September in Guadalajara, Mexico at Noche UFC. But we can still make that fight happen because while Yair Rodriguez did get the job done against Patricio Pitbull, which we will talk about more here shortly, Diego Lopes did not become the featherweight champion, but he put on a hell of a showing, and I believe now it's only right that him and Yair Rodriguez still can go toe-to-toe, even with a title not on the line, as it will be number 3 versus number 5. Yair Rodriguez, prior to this win over Pitbull, was on a 2-fight skid, so he's just won 1 fight, and it wasn't against a ranked fighter. It was against the Bellator veteran and champion turned UFC newcomer. He fended him off. Now, if he can beat a former title challenger in Diego Lopes, he launches himself back into the top 3. He puts himself on a 2-fight win streak, and then he will be the solidified number 1 contender. And for Diego Lopes, it's an opportunity to get right and bounce back before going on a losing streak and proving that he can still hold his spot amongst the top 3 and showcase that he is still a title contender. You pair those career storylines with the drama of the outside of the cage between these two, and that is absolutely what the UFC should and what I believe will do. Even as soon as Tuesday morning, I'm sure that these two will be in the mouths of Dana White and the fellas in the war room in the UFC headquarters. And I think that the venue and the event is already in place as well. In 5 months at Noche UFC in September, we will see Diego Lopes versus Yair Rodriguez. I'm more confident in that matchmaking than any other matchmaking I'll do in the rest of this recap today. But I want to know if you think that is what is next for Diego Lopes and Yair Rodriguez. Are they lining up one another to face off at Noche UFC later this year, or did Yair do enough to prove he's the next number 1 contender for Alexander Volkanovski in a potential title rematch? And for Volkanovski, it's obvious that I don't feel that Yair Rodriguez is next for him, in my personal opinion, and I think it is the clear next number 1 contender because lucky for 145, there were 2 clear-cut number 1 contenders that could have faced him at UFC 314. Lopes got the nod, which means Movsar Evloev, the undefeated phenom, is up next. Movsar Evloev is right in his prime at 31 years of age. He is 9-0 in the UFC and 19-0 overall as a professional mixed martial artist, and he's coming off the heels of a victory over former champion Aljamain Sterling, over former top 5 opponent Arnold Allen, over Diego Lopes, who just fought for the title at UFC 314. Not to mention he has also beaten Dan Ige, who is a perennial top 15 featherweight. You cannot deny the win streak of Evloev. You cannot deny the resume of Evloev. I know that his fight style and lack of interest to a lot of the MMA community is what has held him back from even getting a title shot sooner, but at this point, he is undeniable. That is the next man up. That is the next fight for Alexander Volkanovski, and heading into UFC 314, Volkanovski acknowledged as such and said he will absolutely be ready to turn around in the summer, early fall, and take on Movsar Evloev, as he plans to fight 3 times this year if it all goes according to his plan. And it's completely opposite fight for Alexander Volkanovski compared to what he's been preparing for over the last few years. Yes, of course, Movsar Evloev is the Russian-style wrestler similar to Islam Makhachev, but he does not fight nearly the same. I believe Islam is still much more polished as a mixed martial artist when you look at his skill set and power on the feet. I mean, look what he did to Volkanovski. He knocked him out. I don't foresee that being a path to victory for Movsar Evloev. However, he does not get tired. He does not weather, and he continues to press forward on his opponents and wilt them under his pressure and under his grappling and wrestling. And I think that's something that Volkanovski has not really had to prepare prepare for all that much over the last few years and over the last 10 title fights that he has been a part of. So for Volkanovski fans, you don't have to be as nervous heading into that Evloev fight for the chin of Volkanovski and suffering to a devastating knockout, but he can absolutely still lose to Movsar Evloev because he is that damn good, and that is why that is the next featherweight championship fight, hopefully in July or August in the summertime. Alexander Volkanovski has regained his featherweight championship. He is a two-time champion. He has put to bed all of the narratives and all of the haters. He sits amongst the top of the throne at 145 once again, where he once reigned for numerous years and for 5 title defenses, and now he plans to do it all over again and solidify himself as not only the greatest featherweight of all time, but continue climbing the ranks as one of the best mixed martial artists regardless of weight class in UFC and mixed martial arts history. And standing in his way for his first title defense of his second reign is the undefeated 31-year-old Movsar Evloev. But let me know down in the comments below if you think that is next for Alexander Volkanovski. Is his first championship defense going to be against Movsar Evloev? Will it be against Yair Rodriguez, or will it be against someone else that I'm just not recognizing at the moment? Give me all your thoughts on what's next, and give me your thoughts and takeaways from this UFC 314 phenomenal main event down below. And now that we are done with the UFC 314 title fight, let's get into the 5-round co-main event. And although it was 5 rounds, it wasn't for a title, but there were heavy stakes on the line as the number 7 ranked Michael Chandler was looking to fend off the momentum of the 12 ranked undefeated in the UFC, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. And in the aftermath, the rocket ship has officially been strapped to Paddy Pimblett, and to the moon he goes. Although we all love Alexander Volkanovski and he regained the featherweight championship, I think it's safe to say the biggest stock riser from UFC 314 was none other than Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. 30 years old, right in his prime, 23 wins, only 3 losses. 17 of his 23 victories by way of finish, 7-0 since debuting in the UFC in 2021. 5 of those wins are by stoppage, and none bigger than this one here, UFC 314, where he not only defeats the former title challenger and former 3-time Bellator champion Michael Chandler, he TKOs him in the 3rd round after nearly dominating the entire 13 minutes we saw of this fight. Early on in round 1, Michael Chandler went right in for takedowns, utilizing his collegiate grappling experience more so than we've really ever seen him do through 7 UFC fights thus far. And while we found early success getting the takedowns, he wasn't really able to do much with them. Paddy Pimblett was able to get back up to his feet regularly. He wasn't able to land any big shots, threaten with any submissions, and he really kind of held him down for a few seconds here and there. Paddy would get back up, he'd dump him back down, and that's just kind of a repeat of round number 1. Up until the end, Paddy began to land some pretty solid shots. Round 1 was definitely close. As a matter of fact, I want to take a look at how the judges scored that really quick. Okay, so I'm glad I checked that. 2 of the 3 judges gave Michael Chandler round 1 on the scorecards, and 1 judge gave Paddy the round. And I could see that. I think I would have leaned toward the side of Michael just because there weren't a ton of big shots landed like there were in rounds 2 and rounds 3. Paddy, again, came on a little bit strong at the end, but it wasn't enough to really steal what Michael Chandler had done with the takedown attempts and control time. But then in rounds 2 and 3, Paddy Pimblett would just turn it all up, 16, 17, 18 notches in this fight. He would pick apart Michael Chandler on the feet, started it with brutalizing his calves with the calf kick, then going to the body, going to the head, switching up his arsenal of strikes, had a Superman punch off of the cage, mixing in kicks in all areas, all 3 ranges, head, body, and legs. And he was able to fend off takedowns like he wasn't able to do in round number 1, and that was where you could see Michael Chandler start to weather, and Paddy Pimblett, minute by minute, would begin to take over this fight, truly. Paddy would rain down some very damaging shots, slicing Michael Chandler's face up extremely bad. I believe late into the 2nd round or early on in that 3rd round, he would take Michael Chandler down himself and just destroy him, threaten with submissions, and when he wasn't locking those in, he would be landing nasty elbows and punches. Michael Chandler was either giving up his back for the submission or getting pummeled by strikes in the full mount, and enough was enough for the referee, Kerry Harry Hatley, where he would step in and stop the fight via TKO finish for Paddy 3 minutes and 7 seconds into round number 3. And this was the outing for Paddy Pimblett. I was sitting with my best friends watching this fight on Saturday night, and right when the introductions were happening, I looked at them and said, I can't help it. This feels like the moment where Paddy Pimblett is just going to launch into superstardom like he never has before, and that is exactly what we are seeing in the hindsight of this event as the biggest stock riser on this entirely stacked UFC 314 card. No one is talking about any fighter more than Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. The former Cage Warriors champion already had a huge name on the European and regional mixed martial arts circuits, turned down opportunities to fight in the UFC earlier at a younger age because he felt he wasn't ready, and then finally joined in 2021, and now has tallied off 7 consecutive victories, 9 in a row overall as a pro, and as I said, 5 of those 7 in the UFC are by way of finish. A submission over Bobby Green where he put him to sleep last July in a brutalizing TKO against a former title challenger, Michael Chandler. Now Paddy Pimblett, come Tuesday morning, is catapulted into the top 10 of the most stacked division. And like Uncle Chael Sonnen has been saying for months, he was, leading into this fight, 2 wins away from a title shot. And now Paddy Pimblett, in my opinion, and obviously in Chael Sonnen's opinion, is 1 win away from challenging for the lightweight championship of the world. And in the post-fight interview, he called out every name under the sun.
Dustin, Justin, Charles, or the little posh boy Armin.
Former champion in Charles Oliveira, former interim champions in Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier, former #1 contender, even though he didn't necessarily get the challenge for the title, Arman Tsarukyan. All of them are incredible call-outs, and all 4 of them are incredibly reasonable. I will say Dustin Poirier doesn't seem all that reasonable because he's kind of already said he doesn't want to fight Paddy. It seems that his retirement fight's going to be this summer against Max Holloway in Louisiana. That's just rumored. So I think we can scratch out Dustin. But you're still left with Arman Tsarukyan, Charles Oliveira, and Justin Gaethje. You can sign me up for all 3 of them, but in the same breath, don't sign me up for any one of them because this is what should be next for Paddy Pimblett, as long as the name I'm about to say isn't next for Islam Makhachev's lightweight title. And that name is the former featherweight champion who on this night, once the bell rang to start the main event, was no longer the featherweight champion. Ilia Topuria has stated he is moving up to 155 pounds to finish his career, and it seems all but certain that he will be facing Islam Makhachev for a champion versus, well, not champion matchup anymore, but you get the point. Champion versus champion, it might as well be. Makhachev versus Topuria, one of the best fights that you can make right now. Top 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world, both of them. But we've learned recently that Islam Makhachev wants to wait to make any decisions until the aftermath of UFC 315 in May, because should Jack Della Maddalena defeat Belal Muhammad, I believe Islam Makhachev will want to go up to 170 and try to become a 2-weight world champion, but only if Belal Muhammad loses. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that even if Belal Muhammad wins at 170, Islam Makhachev could potentially not fight Ilia Topuria because he's already given a featherweight champion an opportunity to dethrone him twice in Alexander Volkanovski, and he went 2-0 in both of those, so he could even have a rematch with Charles Oliveira, or maybe a fresh matchup with Justin Gaethje that he's shown interest in the past. So don't get me wrong, hear me out. I want to see Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. That's the fight that makes all the sense in the world. That's one of the biggest fights that you can make in the UFC right now. Honestly, it's the second biggest fight you can do behind John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But if we don't get Ilia Topuria debuting at lightweight against Islam Makhachev for the title, this is absolutely the fight the UFC has to do. Ilia Topuria, Paddy Pimblett, winner gets a shot at the 155-pound championship. Not only are the stylistic X's and O's of that matchup absolutely incredible, chef's kiss in all facets, striking, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, you name it, this checks all the boxes, but they have a history that maybe some of you newer fans aren't even aware of.
When you see me coming,
because you know, when I saw him last time, he got a hand sanitizer bottle bounced off his foot. You do nothing, you little fart. Go and sit back down, you little pussy. Puta.
So I think you take Ilia Toporia's newly found superstardom after knocking out Alexander Volkanovski to become champion and defending by knocking out Max Holloway, the first to ever finish him that way, and pair that with the already stardom that Paddy Pimblett had prior to UFC 314 and now the newly found superstardom post UFC 314. That is also one of the biggest fights that you can make if you're the UFC, and what a good problem to have. That fight could absolutely headline a pay-per-view event with no title on the line whatsoever. And honestly, it's not even out of the realm of possibility to think if Islam Makhachev moves to 170 and the UFC makes him vacate his 155-pound belt, that these two could be competing for a vacant 155-pound championship. There's a lot of dust that needs to settle in order for this fight to happen, but I'm telling you right now, if Ilia Topuria doesn't get to face Islam Makhachev, there's no other matchup to make other than him versus Paddy Pimblett. Topuria, Pimblett in 2025 UFC. Please make it happen. And quickly, I guess we just have to touch on Michael Chandler, who now falls to 2-5 in the UFC since debuting in January of 2021. His victory in that debut fight, a knockout over Dan Hooker, and the other knockout victory in his UFC career was against Tony Ferguson, who at that point in 2022 was on his way out. But for Chandler, he had the high-level losses on his side heading into this one. Yes, he had a 2-4 record, but it was 2 losses to Charles Oliveira, former champion and champion at the time of their first fight, and 2 former interim champions, Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. But now here, losing to someone who obviously is elite in Paddy Pimblett, who showcased just how damn good he is, it still is a loss that takes away a lot for Michael Chandler. This was a must-win fight for him to remain hopeful of title contention. Now, that's all out the window, and I'm not saying he's going to retire. I'm not saying the UFC is going to cut him. He's an obvious commodity to the promotion over the course of these 7 fights and 4 years that he's been with them. But there is no more title shots for Michael Chandler. There will just be him facing relative big names and maybe even welcoming in more prospects like Paddy Pimblett to finish out the rest of his career. And that's just the simple facts of the matter. At 38 years old, soon to be 39, I believe, this month, time is no longer on his side. It waits for no man or woman in mixed martial arts, and that even includes Michael Chandler. So I'd love to hear what you think will be next for Chandler in the aftermath of this fight. What kind of matchups will he have? And let me know your thoughts on this amazing performance from Paddy the Baddy Pimblett, and if you think him versus Ilia is the fight to make, and if not, I mean, pick your poison, right? And I mean good poison, if that's such a thing. Gaethje, Oliveira, Saryukian, any one of them, amazing next matchup for Paddy Pimblett. And one thing is certain, regardless for Paddy, all he needs is one more win, and he's standing across from a champion next. I hope you all enjoyed this recap of the UFC 314 main and co-main events, the new champion in Alexander Volkanovski, and the continuing superstardom rise of Paddy Pimblett after beating Michael Chandler. Give me all of your biggest takeaways from these 2 fights and what you think is next for the winners and losers down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are continuing to chase the goal of 1,000 subscribers in 2025, and any and all support is greatly appreciated. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and a very small Facebook page that I just started, kind of just because I've never been on Facebook before, to be honest with you, so you can join there as well, Verbal Sparring MMA. You can also follow on your favorite audio listening platforms, where every Friday and Monday podcast episodes release on Spotify, Apple, and more. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.